There are some love stories that don't fade. Even after decades, Steve Perry had the fame, the voice, and the world at his feet. But there was one woman he could never forget. Not then, not now. Her name was Sherrie, and she's the love that has stayed with him all these years. Before the spotlight took him, before the arenas, before the platinum records, before the world started calling him The Voice, Steve Perry was just a young man chasing a feeling. Music wasn't fame yet. It wasn't pressure or expectation. It was an escape. It was an expression. It was something that lived in him, and he followed it because he had to. In those early years, Steve's life was made of traveling between small rehearsal rooms, cheap apartments, and long stretches of uncertainty. He was talented, driven, but still becoming. The world had not decided who he was yet. He was still allowed to simply be Steve. And that's when Sherrie entered his life. Sherrie Swafford wasn't dazzled by musicians or fame, because there wasn't any fame yet. She wasn't drawn to a stage persona. She wasn't in love with a rising star. She fell for the quiet, thoughtful, intensely emotional person beneath. The version of Steve who still had doubts, questions, hopes, not answers. Around Sherrie, Steve could exhale. That matters more than most people realize. When someone sees you before the world claims you, that connection becomes something rare, something pure. They spent time the way normal couples do, not running through crowds or flashing camera bulbs, but laughing, eating simple meals, sharing late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. She was the place he returned to when music took too much. The world might not have known his name yet, but to Sherrie, he wasn't waiting to become someone. He already was. When Journey found him and the rocket of fame ignited, everything started moving fast, too fast. But Sherrie remained his grounding point. The quiet in the middle of a life accelerating beyond control. He would go from stages packed with thousands of screaming fans to coming home, laying his head in her lap, and simply being tired. Not celebrated, not idolized, just tired, just human, just Steve. She didn't need anything from him other than the truth of who he was. And in a world that would soon want everything from him, that was the thing that made her different. This wasn't just a relationship, it was an anchor. And anchors matter most right before the storm arrives. When the world became too loud. The rise of Journey was not gradual, it was a tidal wave. One year, Steve was playing small venues and studio rooms. The next, he was standing under blinding lights while thousands of voices echoed back the songs he carried in his chest. The world didn't just notice him, it claimed him. The schedule became relentless. Stadium one night, another city is next. Interviews in the morning, recording sessions squeezed into whatever hours were left. The band was climbing so quickly that the idea of slowing down wasn't even a possibility. Success has momentum, and momentum does not ask if your heart can keep up. For Steve, the stage was electric, a place where everything made sense. But the silence after the show was something entirely different. Tour buses, empty hotel rooms, and hallways that never felt like home. And every time he walked back into the world outside the spotlight, Sherrie was there, steady, warm, familiar. But the time between those returns kept stretching farther and farther apart. Loving someone who belongs to millions is not jealousy. It's disorientation. Because the man who sits across from you at dinner is not the same man the world screams for. And slowly, the space between those two versions starts to grow. Fans adored Steve. Journalists chased him. Managers needed him. Radio stations depended on him. Record labels built timelines around him. And in all of that noise, Sherrie was the only part of his life that was quiet. She tried to protect that quiet. She tried to protect him, but love has weight, and fame has gravity. And when the two collide, one of them always bends. Steve once reflected on those years not with anger, but with exhaustion, with the ache of someone who knows what it costs to give everything to the world. It was all happening so fast. There wasn't time to think, only to move. He was being pulled forward by a career that was bigger than him, and she was left holding the stillness that was slowly slipping out of reach. They weren't losing love, they were losing time, and time is the one thing you can't negotiate with. The cracks didn't show in arguments or dramatic scenes. They showed in absence, in the distance, in moments missed that couldn't be replaced. And soon, something had to give. the song that froze, a moment in time. By the time Steve began working on his first solo album, everything inside him was stretched thin. The success, the travel, the emotional weight of holding two worlds at once. And in the middle of all of that, there was still Sherrie. The love was real, the strain was real, and the fear of losing what mattered most was real. So instead of trying to explain it, Steve did what he knew how to do best. He put it into a song. That's how Oh Sherrie was born. This wasn't a love song written in hindsight. It was written while the relationship was still alive. You can hear it in his voice, that mixture of devotion and desperation. The lyrics weren't poetic metaphors, they were pleas. And when Sherrie appeared in the music video, the world got a rare look at something private. Two people trying to hold on to each other while everything around them pulled them apart. The song was a hit, massive, immediate, unforgettable. But hits don't fix what pressure breaks. When the world sings your love story back to you, it stops being just yours. The spotlight that made the song iconic was the same one that made the relationship fragile. The more people celebrated love, the harder it became to protect it. And sometimes, the world doesn't take your love away. It just makes it impossible to keep. The quiet goodbye. There was no dramatic ending, no harsh words, no moment where everything suddenly fell apart. Instead, it was the kind of goodbye that happens slowly, the kind where you wake up one day and realize that love is still there, but life has moved into a place where neither of you can reach each other the way you once did. Steve was being pulled forward by a career that didn't pause. Sherrie was trying to hold on to something real in a world that never stopped spinning. They both cared deeply. That was never the question, but caring and keeping are not always the same. Steve later said, "We were good together, but we were just too young, and everything was happening around us so fast." There's no blame in that, no regret, just the quiet knowledge that timing can be as powerful as love itself. When the relationship ended, Sherrie didn't speak out. She didn't chase cameras or attention. She didn't try to define her place in his story. She simply stepped back into her life with grace. In the years that followed, she built a quiet, private world for herself. She worked as an esthetician and yoga instructor in California. She stayed far from the spotlight, far from the noise, far from the version of their love the world imagined. Because what they had was real, and real things don't need to be performed. And for Steve, the breakup didn't feel like closing a door. It felt like putting something precious away, where time couldn't touch it anymore. It was a love that didn't fail. It simply ended where it was still beautiful. Years of silence and the weight he carried. After the breakup, the world still saw Steve Perry, the voice that could lift an arena into a single breath, the frontman of one of the biggest rock bands in America. But something in him had changed. The tours continued, the records kept selling, the audiences were massive. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But inside, the weight was growing. The pressure, the pace, the feeling of being pulled in every direction except home. And then, something happened that shifted everything. Steve's mother became gravely ill. This wasn't the kind of pain you can outrun. This wasn't the kind of grief that the stage could drown out. It was personal, deep, and unmoving. He didn't talk about it much. He didn't make statements. He didn't try to narrate it for the world. He simply left. In the late 1980s, at the height of Journey's fame, Steve stepped away. From the tours, from the spotlight, from the identity the world had written for him. It wasn't one reason. It was years of accumulated weight. The exhaustion of being everything to everyone. The emotional echo of a love that had been impossible to protect. The grief of watching his mother slip away. He once said, "I needed to find my heart again." And sometimes finding your heart means losing your place in the world. The music world kept moving. The industry kept spinning. Journey continued, but differently, slowly, painfully. And Steve? He disappeared into a silence that lasted not months, but years. Fans wondered, rumors spread, but none of them ever really understood. Because the truth was simple. Steve Perry didn't walk away from music. He walked back toward himself, the quiet, the stillness, the space to breathe again. And in that space, the memory of Sherrie didn't disappear. It settled, not as a regret, not as longing, but as something he once had when life was still gentle, a reminder of who he had been, and who he might one day be again. Love returned, and grief returned with it. Time moved forward. Life changed as it always does. Steve eventually found himself in new seasons, new chapters, new versions of who he was meant to become. He returned to music again, though not in the same way as before. His voice was still powerful, still unmistakable, but there was something different inside it, something softer, something wiser, something that understood the cost of loving deeply. He found love again, later in life, with Kelly Nash, a woman whose kindness and courage opened his heart at a time when he believed that part of him had gone quiet. Losing her was another chapter of heartbreak, one that changed him in a different way, gentler, quieter, more reflective. But even then, when fans and interviewers asked about Sherrie, he didn't avoid her name. He didn't distance himself from the memory. He smiled, a small, warm, unmistakably genuine smile, the kind that comes from a place untouched by bitterness. Because Sherrie wasn't wounded, she was a moment in time, a pure love that shaped his life before fame reshaped everything else. She represented who he was when the world was still simple, before audiences, before spotlight, before life became something enormous. Steve once said, very simply, "She was the love of my life." We were just too young, not too wrong, not too broken, just young. And sometimes the first person who sees you clearly remains part of your story forever. Not because you still need them, but because they helped you become who you are. Sherrie wasn't the ending. She was the beginning. Some love stories don't need to last forever to stay forever. Sherrie was the beginning of Steve Perry's heart, the part the world never got to take away. And some people remain with us simply because they mattered. If you'd like more untold stories behind the music that shaped our lives, subscribe to Backstage Melody, where the songs are timeless and the stories finally get to be heard.